Welcome back, horror fans. Today we have a spine-chilling episode for you. Get ready to hear 3 chilling true night shift horror stories that will haunt you. These tales come straight from the experiences of those who have worked the night shift, where the darkness can hide the most terrifying secrets. So dim the lights, grab a snack, and let's dive in. Story 1. The Silent Caller. Our first story comes from a nurse named Rachel, who worked the night shift at a small-town hospital. The halls were always quiet during those late hours, the kind of silence that made even the faintest sounds seem louder. It was a job she had done for years, and though the nights could be eerie, she had never experienced anything she couldn't explain. Until that night. It was just past 2 a.m. when the phone at the nurse's station rang. Rachel, mid-sip of her coffee, frowned at the caller ID. It was coming from room 307. That was odd. Room 307 had been empty since the patient in there, a man named Mr. Holden, had passed away earlier that evening. Thinking it was a mistake, she picked up the phone. "Nurse's station, how can I help you?" There was no response, just the sound of heavy breathing on the other end. "Hello," she repeated. Still nothing. Just the slow, raspy sound of someone breathing. Her stomach twisted uneasily, but she figured it was a prank. Maybe a wrong number or a crossed line in the system. She hung up. Less than 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. Rachel's pulse quickened as she checked the caller ID. Room 307. Again. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" This time, there was a whisper, faint, barely audible. "Help me." Rachel's blood ran cold. She slammed the phone down and immediately grabbed her flashlight. She had to check. It had to be a mistake. Maybe a nurse had forgotten to update the room's status. Maybe someone had wandered in by accident. Her footsteps echoed down the dimly lit hallway as she approached room 307. The door was closed. Slowly, she pushed it open, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made. The machines were off. The air was still. There was no one there. She checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing. A chill crawled down her spine. Trying to shake the feeling, she told herself it was a glitch in the phone system. Hospitals had old wiring. Maybe the line was still active somehow. But deep down, something about it felt wrong. The next morning, when the day shift nurses arrived, Rachel mentioned the strange calls to one of her coworkers. The older nurse's face paled. "Room 307?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "Yeah. Why?" The nurse swallowed. "Mr. Holden passed away in that room at exactly 2:05 a.m. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The first call had come in at 2:07 a.m. Was it a ghostly plea for help? A spirit lingering for just a moment longer? Or something far, far more sinister? You decide. Story 2. The Shadow in the Hallway. Our second story takes us to a man named Tom, a security guard working the night shift at an old abandoned factory. The factory had been closed for years, its purpose long forgotten. The machinery that once roared now sat rusting and still, its empty halls echoing with memories of a time long past. Tom was used to the quiet. He'd walked the halls countless times before, the creaks of the building and the wind outside never bothering him. But one night, something was different. It started like any other shift. Tom made his rounds, checking the locked doors in the old office rooms. The factory was silent, save for the faint sound of his footsteps echoing through the dark. As he walked down a narrow hallway near the back of the building, something caught the corner of his eye. A shadowy figure darted across the hall, moving quickly and vanishing into the darkness. Tom blinked and stopped, squinting to make sure he hadn't imagined it. The hallway was empty. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a rodent scurrying by. The factory was full of odd noises and strange sights after all. But as he turned the corner, something hit him, a cold breeze. It wasn't just a draft from the broken windows. This was different. This felt like it was coming from somewhere. He shivered and paused, his breath coming out in visible puffs. That's when he heard it, a whisper, soft, barely audible, but clear enough to send a chill down his spine. "Get out!" His heart thudded in his chest as he froze, his body tense, unwilling to move. The whisper had come from behind him. Slowly he turned, his flashlight scanning the hallway, and there it was, the shadowy figure standing at the end of the hall. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even human, at least not in the way Tom understood. It was a silhouette, a dark, shifting mass with no clear shape or form. It simply stared at him with a presence that felt almost suffocating. The temperature dropped further, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Tom's legs felt like lead, his mind screaming at him to run, to leave. Without thinking, he turned and bolted, sprinting down the hall, past the empty offices and toward the exit. His breath was ragged as he fumbled with the door, nearly slipping in his haste. He didn't stop until he was outside, his body trembling from head to toe. The cool night air didn't calm him, it only reminded him of the darkness he had just left behind. Tom never returned to that factory. He couldn't shake the image of the figure standing there, its dark presence looming in the hallway, watching him, waiting. Was it a ghost, a lingering soul trapped in the decaying walls of the factory? Or was it something much more terrifying, something that had been there long before the factory closed, something that had no intention of letting him leave? You decide. Story 3. The Unseen Presence. Our third story takes place in a small diner at the edge of town, known for its old-fashioned charm and cozy atmosphere. It wasn't the busiest spot, but the regulars loved it, especially late at night when the world outside seemed to fall away. That's where Emily worked, a waitress who had been employed at the diner for a few months. She enjoyed the quiet of the late-night shifts, the calm rhythm of pouring coffee and delivering pie to sleepy patrons. But one night, everything changed. The diner was nearly empty. Just a couple of regulars at the counter, their heads bent over the newspapers. Emily moved between the tables, doing her best to stay busy and keep the customers satisfied. It was then that she first felt it, a strange chill in the air. At first, she thought it was just the cold breeze from the cracked door or the old air conditioning unit. But the temperature seemed to drop unnaturally, a sharp contrast to the warm glow of the diner's yellow lights. She tried to ignore it and continued with her tasks. But then, the lights flickered. Emily paused, glancing up at the overhead bulbs. Flicker, flicker. Then they went out, only to come back on seconds later, casting long shadows across the diner. It was at that moment that she heard it, a scraping noise, the unmistakable sound of a chair dragging across the floor. But there was no one near the table where the noise seemed to come from. Her heart skipped a beat. Cautiously, Emily approached the table, her footsteps slow and deliberate. As she got closer, she noticed the chair, a dark wooden seat near the window, was askew, as if someone had just stood up and left in a hurry. But the table was empty. Frowning, she turned to walk back to the kitchen, her pulse racing. Just as she took a step away from the table, she felt it. A cold hand, icy firm, gripped her shoulder. She spun around, her breath caught in her throat, but there was no one there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the diner, her eyes darting from empty booths to the kitchen door. She couldn't explain it. Terrified, she rushed to the back of the diner, her breath shallow. She found her coworker, who had been working the kitchen all night, standing by the sink. "Did you see that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Her coworker Claire turned to her, looking pale. "I thought I was the only one." She swallowed hard. "I felt someone watching me all night." Emily's blood ran cold. She hadn't told Claire about what had just happened, but it seemed like her coworker had been experiencing something just as strange. From that night on, Emily never worked another late shift alone, and every time she stepped foot inside the diner after dark, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still there, lingering in the shadows. Was it a restless spirit trapped in the diner, unable to leave? Or was it something more sinister, something that had made its home in the quiet corners of the diner, waiting for its next victim? You decide. Thank you for joining us for these 3 chilling true night shift horror stories that will haunt you. If you enjoyed these tales, please give us a thumbs up and share your own night shift horror stories in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-tingling content. Until next time, stay safe and keep the lights on.